Cardano economics.
Oh
What are your
yes,
thoughts on
yes.
that?
Oh, okay. So let me start on my soapbox. Um, so Rick, I'm gonna first of all, I'm not sure where I stand on this issue. Rick and I were discussing it earlier this morning, but we were talking about the economic model of Cardano, and I'm gonna paint this picture in the frame of reference. I'm using the stake pool operator as the frame of reference. And the reason why I wanted to talk about the economic model is because I'm not sure whether Cardano is moving more towards an equitable distribution of income or they're embracing capitalism. At the beginning of this project, I thought they would let the free markets decide. But recent actions from, I don't know, the Cardano Foundation, IOG, and Emergo seem to paint a picture that they're moving more towards that equitable distribution of income, or at least embracing practices which align with that sort of economic model. And what do I mean by that? When you look at some of the latest announcements about stake pool delegation, they're giving out these golden tickets, allowing these smaller pools to thrive within the economic system. And the best way I was able to understand how this relates to the economic model of Cardano was to draw parallels to the NBA. And I'm going to try to make this as clear as possible. So this is how
I love your
this is my
examples.
line of thinking. So the NBA is the National Basketball Association. It consists of 32 teams. And for all those that are not living within the States, this is the premier league for basketball. You win the NBA championship, you are the best NBA team in the world. So there are 32 teams, and there's the NBA. There's two different organizations. There's the owners organization and then the players organization. So every so often they meet. It's called the CBA, or the collective bargaining agreement. So the owners meet with their representatives and the players meet with their representatives, and they come to this meeting and they discuss the revenue stream for the NBA in the next season. So they talk about stadium seats, they talk about ticket sales, they talk about merchandise, they talk about uh, advertisement money, money from TV deals, all these different things. And the owners fight their case, and the players fight for their case, both of them trying to get the larger piece of the pie. But the problem with the NBA is that it's very skewed. For example, these 32 teams are found in various different markets. Some of them are oversaturated markets, and some of them are undersaturated markets. So you have teams in oversaturated markets like Los Angeles. So if you go to a LA Lakers game, it's probably going to be full. Or if you go into New York is a big market. You go to Boston or you go to Miami, those are huge markets. They can fill up the arena. They are profitable teams. Those teams are always going to be profitable because of their location. But if you go to smaller markets like Milwaukee, or you go to Cleveland, or you go to now Detroit, they're not going to fill up the stadium every night. So they're not receiving the same revenue as the Lakers or the Heat or the Boston Celtics. And as a result, those teams, those owners from those teams, they create this argument with between the owners. Basically, they force the players to put a lot of their money into escrow, and all this money gets accumulated, and some of it gets redistributed to the lesser known teams. So they take a loss year after year after year. They're not profitable NBA teams, yet they still continue to exist because the league itself supports it through the other owners and their sales for their teams. So it's kind of like a wealth tax. And I've heard Charles speak about the wealth tax in previous I think I saw him on Twitter a while ago to speak about the wealth tax, and he's not a fan of it. And I'm not a fan of that either. But when you look at Cardano, so IOG, Emergo, and Cardano Foundation can be looked at as the owners, and we're using stake pool operators as a frame of reference. So the stake pool operators are considered the players here. And the idea that, like, for example, the Cardano Foundation or IOG, they're pressured in a way to distribute stake to smaller pools in order to prop up smaller pools, in order to give a false sensation that they're profitable even though they're not, is more of the equitable distribution of income that the NBA uses. Well, there's one key difference between the NBA and Cardano. the owners take a huge risk in building stadiums in these lesser markets. So it's not like you can say, this market doesn't ceases to exist. I'm going to destroy my stadium and put it in a more thriving city. You can't do that because the economies of scale, you can't just build stadiums everywhere. But for stake pool operators, it's a relatively low cost to get into the game. So what we're saying is we're not letting free market decide. We are propping up pools that maybe don't have an economic model in order to give this illusion that pools are profitable for everyone when in reality they're not. The reality is that even if you are in a developing country and you're running a stake pool, you're probably using a VPS from, I don't know, Germany, or you're probably using a VPS in the United States. The infrastructure is just not there. So are the pools that are on the lower tier or are struggling to survive, should they be offered that life blanket and we embrace this model of the equitable distribution of income, or are we going to let the free markets decide? And Rick, I want to open up the floor to you first, and then I guess we can hop over to the comment section. What do you think about this? Should pools just the lesser pools just die out, or should we offer that life jacket?
Yeah, well, I always like to hear your examples because you're a businessman and you know how it works. I mean, you look at the big picture. And right now, I think there's a balance to be had where you have the raw, unbridled free market, totally unleashed, pure 100% capitalism where whoever has the biggest bags wins, period. And you're not going to compete with the pre-mined ADA, the organizations that have the billions in pre-mined data. You're not going to compete with those guys. The small pools can't. I mean, it's just impossible. That's just a fact. I knew that 3 years ago going into it. That's what you look at. You say, how much is pre-mined? Okay, this much. Okay, well, that's not as much compared to other cryptocurrencies, right? And then you have the exchanges who hold other people's ADA, OPA, right? Other people's ADA. And there was this concept of using enterprise addresses to balance things out and fair them out. But the exchange can do whatever they want, that ADA. They can do whatever they want. They control the keys. I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm both perfectly okay with the pre-mined data. I'm perfectly okay with the exchanges. And I think there's a balance to be had while the network is young and the network is bootstrapping. There's a balance to be had with the Owners Association, Cardano Foundation, and IOG helping maintain the smaller pools in order to improve competition, okay? For some period of time. At some point it has to end. At some point the training wheels come off. I don't think the NBA is ever going to end it, right? If they have 32 teams, they say, well, we need 32 teams, and if we just let the other ones die off, we'll only have 16. We'll have only half as many teams, right? So in order to keep the NBA more entertaining, more engaging, I guess they've come up with this model to help the teams that aren't profitable by having the Owners Association support them, right? Otherwise, they won't have I know I've used the Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, Patriots examples before as well. Sports teams are a great example. So for some period of time, in order to bootstrap the network, until my thoughts on this, after you brought it up this morning right before the podcast and we talked about it for a little bit, is once we get to K equals 1,000 next March, and the stake starts to distribute out into the 32 million saturation point, the training wheels are probably going to come off completely because Cardano Foundation is going to have to sell some of those bags. They're not going to hold on to them forever in order to distribute the stake. There's going to be demand. It only makes sense. And say, oh, you know what? We can buy a certain amount of marketing, or we can buy a certain amount of legal representation. You got to pay for that stuff, right? You got to pay for, if you got ADA and the price of ADA is $1.30, and you go, you know what, I can purchase top-end lawyers by selling this ADA. It makes sense, right? So at some point, I think that that support for small pools, you got 2,000 stake pools out there at some point. Right now we got 1,300. So at some point they'll have to say, well, we can't keep doing this. They can do it to some extent, smaller and smaller and smaller amounts. And so eventually I think you'll see that kind of abate. But there's a balance to be had. Okay. I agree with you. I think it's a great example. And I think it also at some point it will start to diminish and it'll just be the successful players will maintain the market. But right now, even players like you and I, we run pools. We would get murdered by the exchanges if they just went all out, brutal, unleashed, horse, just unleashed. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a balance to be had. So, I guess, is that a fair point? I think that's a fair point.
I think that's a fair point. That's a fair point. I mean, if
Charles said, never mention the Browns and Cardano in the same sentence. I compare Cardano to the New England Patriots and Pittsburgh Steelers, and Pittsburgh Steelers 9-0. We're going for number one, Charles. Number one, all day, every day. We are going for number one, brother. Number one. And Charles is the quarterback, and we're the freaking linemen.
I like that analogy. I like that analogy.
Yeah, I'm okay with the quarterback. You gotta have a good quarterback, man. He's my quarterback. You damn right. You damn Skippy.